This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for the Intentionality Gurus with Candace Pollock. In today's episode, we are going to explore the hidden iceberg beneath our thoughts, habits, and decisions so you can take back the steering wheel of your life and work with intentionality, clarity, and power. In this episode, we're diving into the science of the predictive brain, a concept that explains why so many of our daily reactions, assumptions, and even self-sabotaging behaviors happen without us constantly choosing them. And most importantly, we'll talk about how you can use this knowledge to stop getting hijacked by old patterns and start rewiring your mind to work for you. There's also a perfect lead up to the next flight of my Self-Sabotage to Self-Command Bootcamp, launching in late June. So if this topic resonates, stay tuned for details at the end. So I'm ready for the boot camp. I need it right now.
Alrighty. So
Okay.
we'll get a little bit of a taste of it. So the idea is, we've spent a lot of time talking about how we react to things and how we have emotions sometimes that hijack us or creep up on us that drive some of our behaviors. And so all of that remains in place. But what the neuroscience has shown, the study, the scientists and so on in neuroplasticity and neuroscience have discovered is that there's another element that comes into play that we didn't necessarily recognize in the beginning. And that is that the brain actually is predicting what will happen. So, when you do an email or you text something on your phone and words are being offered to you as possible next words in the sentence, it's anticipating what you're going to say
Right.
based on past experience of, hello, how are you? If once you say how after saying hello, the model would basically possibly fill in how are you because it
Right.
predicts it. Well, our brain does that as well. All right. And it doesn't always get it right. And so what happens is when it does get it right, we're reinforcing that, oh, yes, this would be the natural sequence from this particular feeling sensation in the body, or this would be the reaction that we have to anticipate will occur when something else happens. Maybe a light switch goes on, or there's a particular sound. There are all of these sensory things that the body is processing. And being aware of how it's constantly, our brain is helping us constantly guess what will happen next based on past experiences, it's going to fill in the gaps for us. And the thought we can be having is one, paying attention to when that happens, and then making a conscious choice, that fork in the road that we always talk about whether we're going to go in the direction of what our brain is predicting, or we're going to do it with a different input or output. So, has this happened to you that you can remember?
Well, it happens to me quite a bit. And it's interesting that we're doing this subject today because I've been working with a client who um, constantly, when something is starts to go, I'll say south, um, they believe that they know exactly how it's going to end up. They know exactly what the results are. And they overthink it to the point that they are getting themselves all wound up. And as I've been working with this client, I realize that I do the exact same thing. I perceive that, oh, this has happened before, so this is how it's going to happen. This is how this person's going to react. And therefore, this is how I'm going to feel. And in the past, I would say 2 weeks, I've had to really be very conscious of those thoughts because I make my life very negative because I'm making assumptions that don't have to be.
Yeah, and jumping off on that, how that then can get into a rut in terms of the interaction that, oh yeah, that person always says that and they always do that. I had an office mate that I used to, this is a terrible phrase, but I'm going to share it anyway. Just in full disclosure, I can be a terrible person sometimes. I used to think of him as the man with a dirty diaper because if something didn't go his way, he often would jump to conclusions, my perception, obviously, and he would get locked into, no, it has to be this way, it has to be this way, and he would not be open to anything else. And we were all sharing space, and it was frustrating that we couldn't even have a conversation about it. He would just shut down. And so I thought of him as the man with the dirty diaper because it would go, and there was just no getting through to him. And I found myself going into the conversations just expecting that and being girded for, a tug of war. And in time, I learned other ways of communicating and so on. But later I was able to discern that some of my self-sabotaging habits, mental habits, were going in with that mindset and getting triggered, and then I was triggering probably the same self-sabotaging element that he had. We were trying to avoid being controlled by
Right.
each other. I didn't want him driving the whole conversation to a conclusion without getting some other input, but he probably didn't appreciate me trying to give input. We're not sharing space anymore, unrelated, COVID just basically created a lot of different dynamics. So it had nothing to do with our interaction. I wish I could have been a bigger person and could have seen those forks in the road where I had choices previously, but I just didn't see them at the time,
Right.
which is the whole point of the intentionality gurus. So the brain is constantly guessing and like what's going to happen next. And it wants you to be ready. I mean, it's trying to do the right thing. So, and this is how old habits and patterns can feel automatic, like we don't have control over them. The other thing I found really fascinating in the science is that this predictive element that the brain has saves energy. Like who would think? All right, so it helps us survive and conserve energy because it favors the familiar things, not always the optimal things, but it would rather predict, something unhappy so that we can be ready and not risk some harm, rather than have us have to overcome something, being too optimistic and going into a situation where we needed to like ramp up suddenly. So anyway, it fascinates me in terms of that saving energy,
Sure.
but it can lock us into our self-sabotaging behaviors because it's always anticipating when she does X, when she raises her left hand, then it's going to mean such and such. Where else does it show up for you or in those that you notice? Anybody? Not me, but anyone else?
Well, I noticed it a lot in myself over the last month or so with my husband working out of town. Um, Logically, I know, hey, this is a good thing. He's working. We want him to work. He wants to work. But I was finding that when he would leave town on Sunday, um, I just felt I would get into this angry mode that he was leaving me, which logically he wasn't. I mean, he was leaving, but he wasn't leaving me. And my brain could not wrap around it that, hey, this is an okay thing. This is not a bad thing. And when I finally realized why I was thinking in that manner, it took me way back, before I even met him, when I was going through my divorce. And my ex husband left me. And for some reason, those memories were coming up, and I was just getting very angry and very intense about it. And it was very difficult for me to tell him what I was going through. So he just saw that I was angry and he couldn't figure out why. And so his way of resolving it was to remove himself from it. So he wasn't calling me. And so then I was getting angrier because I'm not hearing from him. And I
That
had,
sounds such a classic scenario
yeah,
for couples in particular, but it could be coworkers, it could be, all sorts of things.
right. And so once I finally like, I don't know what triggered me, but something triggered me to say, hey, do you like feeling this way? I mean, I do have this little sticky on my computer. Um, and I believe you're the one who has used this quote and is, how is it working for you? And I
I
was,
think that came from Dr. Phil.
oh, okay. And I'm sitting here, you know, one day and I looked at it and I said, this is not working for me. Wow. And do I have to be angry? No. And so what can I do to change it? And the first thing I did was I picked up the phone and I called him. And I could hear the relief in his voice, like, oh, my wife is back. But it was also that I realized that I had the control again, that I didn't have to feel so bad.
Well, that you could recognize that this dynamic was going on. So in the science, they call that a predictive error, prediction errors. And so you're upgrading the software, so to speak, in terms of when so and so leaves the house, it doesn't mean he's leaving me. It's not that last scenario that we had that was traumatic and unhappy and so on and so on. New data has come in, and now it has more data to rely upon when it's making its predictions.
Right.
I mean, that's the hope. But if we can be bringing that conscious thought um, to mind, then we have that fork in the road again. It's like, oh, all right, and then the brain will, in theory, respond accordingly, depending on what data we're constantly feeding it. And that's where we can be doing some preemptive things, as in positive intelligence, doing some mindfulness techniques that help us switch from a reactive part of our brain to a more wise and suitable part of the brain that can process the data accordingly. But I just love the idea. I remember years ago learning about, an analogy was like the black box that we have in airplanes and so on, or
Yeah.
I guess in large in trains and so on, where they can determine um, some of the mechanical things that occurred that may have preceded a crash or some other upset. And so that's something that we can do as an override on our own, to just as you did, to go back over it and say, okay, this isn't working for me. It's not the outcome I wanted. And in fact, bring some of the rational thinking to
Yeah.
mind, to work your way through it so that the brain can update its data. The other part I really enjoyed when I was researching this is that the brain basically can be trained to predict something better, just as I said. But the idea is to be really intentional about practicing awareness and the noticing. We've been talking about noticing, I think, from the very first podcast, is an underrated technique in terms of showing alternative options where we can make a conscious choice, and it interrupts that automatic predictive pilot going on. So you've described that, and have you noticed other people being able to do that?
Um, some of my clients, um, with it, but it takes practice, um, because I think you're right that our brain is going to take us in a way that we've reacted in the past.
Hmm.
And unless we're aware of, hey, that's not the road I want to go down, let me turn around and come back and reassess. Um, but I think it's very easy to say, well, you know what? I'm here because I had no place else to go.
Hmm.
And that's how I was feeling initially when I was getting so angry. It was like, yeah, I'm here. And I get to be sad and I get to be angry. And all these things going through my head. In less than 24 hours, I was on the phone to my one son talking to him about, hey, maybe I'm going to come down and stay with you for a couple of weeks, which of course he was ecstatic. He was going to have a live-in cook, a live-in maid. Hey, yeah, mom, come on down. And um, when I told him why, he said, no, you can't come. And I said, why? And he goes, you got to get over your anger before you come here.
Ooh.
And that was sort of like the click. It was like I was running away from something,
Hmm.
but I was going to take it with me. And for him to say that to me, it was like, okay, I got to rethink this. And that was the catalyst that helped me realize that I don't have to feel so lousy. Yeah, I can be sad, I can be disappointed, but I don't have to have that control me.
Exactly. And to drive it for, you know, forgive the phrasing, but for faulty reasons, because it wasn't the same situation.
Right.
And to be, remember that a lot of the things we do are to keep us safe. So, that's what the brain is trying to predict. What do I need to do in order to keep this individual safe? And I know we always talk about it, kind of anthropomorphize it, as if it's a independent person from us, but it is trying to keep us emotionally and physically safe. And if um, we're headed into unfamiliar territory, well, then our bodies might be sending signals and so on, but it may have sent signals before where we weren't safe, and then the brain is going to pick up on that. Years and years ago, I had an experience where I had to attend hearings at a particular entity, agency, on behalf of my clients. And there was one particular hearing officer who clearly had some mental health issues and substance abuse issues and so on. But in the early days, he was always really nice to me and, professional. But I think he was struggling with something later, maybe about 5 years later, when this phase that I went through occurred. And he started talking to me, possibly in the same ways that he'd always spoken to me, but for some reason, it was particularly um, triggering for me. And I got to the point where it had a little bit of he would say things now, Miss Pollock, do you really mean to tell me such and such and such and such? And in the early days, I would kind of laugh at that because it's like, yes, that's my argument.
Yeah.
That's why I'm sharing it with you. But something shifted, and maybe it was his tone, maybe it was me. I was never really clear. However, um, I was able to come up with a different outcome. But it got so bad that one time I it was almost like that scene in the Cane Mutiny or something. I forget what it is. Yeah, the Cane Mutiny with him, um, Humphrey Bogart, where he is getting paranoid and he's questioning people and so on. That's how it felt to me. I mean, my felt sense of it, the experience was that. And one day it was getting so bad that I thought, oh my God, I think I'm going to cry. And I didn't want to, one, let him see me get that emotional. And two, I didn't want to embarrass my client or have my client think that I was some kind of idiot. So fortunately, the hearing was ending and I scooted out of the room as quickly as I could, but I was processing it later. And my husband was a psychiatrist, and we happened to be in the car going to an event. It was a Friday. And I was explaining how I couldn't understand how this occurred to me, how this thing came over me. And I had such a, big reaction. And he patted my knee. He was driving and he patted my knee and he said, dear, dear, you're having a screen memory. I was in the present, interacting with this hearing officer. But I was living it as if I was in a prior experience. And I went to a parochial school when we lived in Houston, and I had a particularly demeaning, mean nun for fifth grade. And I remember vividly it was that because she would talk to us in those tones. And we were vulnerable, young, tiny, kids and so on. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we can just be aware of, we can stop, look, and listen, the phrase we've used before, just to notice, when did it start? What am I feeling? Where does it tend to show up? And then catch ourselves in the act of making up the mental picture that may or may not be happening in the present. And then in the context of this predictive brain, help it update its data so that we can start to eliminate that automatic reaction. So once I had that insight, I just have to share with you, once I had that insight, it was as if I broke the spell. And then he was like really inappropriate later and saying all sorts of things. And I was not alone in that. I mean, I found out later, he was doing this to everybody. But then I got back to my old kind of laughing at him, like, yeah, really, you have no control over me, you have no special power over me. So anyway, that was a long explanation.
But what you're pointing out with is something that most of us don't do on a regular basis, and that is stop and try to figure out where this is all coming from.
Mhm.
And the 2 weeks ago when I was really went through this, I ruined the weekend that my husband was home, because as soon as he walked in the door, I knew he was going to be leaving again. And so my brain kept going through that all weekend long. And so I I wasn't I wasn't being mindful of the good things that I had going on. And so once my son brought this up to me, that I was angry, I realized that, wow, why did my brain go there? And I made myself actually sit down and think about it, which, I think was the best thing I could have done, because it was like, oh, okay, but they're not the same people, and this is 40 plus years difference. And once I could, figure all that out, it was like, I'm okay now.
And my husband leaving on a business trip is not me being abandoned or,
Right. Yep.
negated.
Yeah.
Yep. Right.
Exactly.
But it had those elements.
Yep.
Yeah, and it all boils down to choice. And I think if there's, a common denominator and everything we talk about in the intentionality gurus, it's that choice, that fork in the road, just being able to notice it and then make a choice. And I always talk about it in terms of just trying on the jacket. We can go down the new fork in the road that we have just discovered, and maybe we change our mind and say, nope, that's not for me. I'm going to go back to the original way. But, that's the point, having choice, so that incrementally we can be spiraling up rather than spiraling down.
That is
So that's it for today. So
well,
what action step would you recommend for somebody?
um, to take the time to sit and think, to be mindful of where you are and why you're feeling the way you're feeling, and where is that feeling. Because you've asked me that a couple of times in the last couple of years. When I'll bring up a feeling, you'll say, well, where do you feel it? And I'm becoming more aware of, where am I feeling it? Is it physical? Is it emotional? Is it a combination of both? Um, and there are certain things that you can do differently for a physical pain than you can for an emotional pain. And
Mhm.
so, creating that toolbox, and asking for help. Um, because that's really what I did when I called my son. I was asking for help without
Mhm.
saying it. And he figured it out. And it was like, okay. And
Almost like checking in, like am I off base here, or,
yeah,
is this, something I need to pay attention to? Yeah, I love that. And
exactly.
how lovely that he had the insight to be able to offer that. And that you were open to having it being offered. Not everybody wants to try the jacket on. Somebody might offer
Right.
a suggestion and it may be rejected, in part because of some of that self-sabotaging thinking that we're all prone to do.
See, I knew I just didn't want to stay where I was. And
Yeah.
I didn't, you know, when I first said I'm going to go there, and he was all excited because he saw it as I was coming for a visit. I wasn't running away. But the more I spoke about it, it was like, oh no, you can't come here. And, but I was grateful for it, because, it was like, oh, there is a difference. I'm not just coming to visit. Okay. And I also think he knew if I had come down there and been his cook and maid, being angry, I probably would have redone his whole apartment and he never found it.
So there
So
may have been a little brain prediction going on there that he had to protect himself from a complete remodeling of his apartment.
you got it. You got it. So before we close out, I know that you have this boot camp coming up. Do we have any clear information on it that we can share today?
I have a couple of other pieces that have to fall into place, but I'm heading for the end of June. And the idea, it will be like a 6 week to 7 week boot camp that follows a particular pattern and so on. And the science shows that it's really impactful and so on, but the exact details of when it will start, I don't have for you just yet. But if people are interested, then you can email me at Candace at the Intentionality Gurus. It's Candace, Candace. Only one N in Candace, because a lot of people want to make it Candance. At the intentionalitygurus.com, and then just say that you want to be on the wait list.
That sounds wonderful. Well, we'll make sure that's all in the show notes. So for any of you that have missed that, and if you ever find yourself stuck in old patterns, knowing that you should do something, but somehow you're doing the opposite, you're not broken. You're running a brain that's trying to predict your world based on old data. But the good news is, with intention and the right tools, you can update the model. You can teach your brain to expect, create, and sustain something better. That's exactly what we'll be doing in the next round of the Self-Sabotage Self-Command Bootcamp. As Candace said, it's going to launch in late June. In this episode, if we sparked your curiosity, or if you're tired of being hijacked by old thought loops, check the show notes to learn more or join the waitlist. Let's rewrite and rewire what's possible together. Until next time, keep noticing, keep choosing, and keep practicing intentionality. Thanks, Candace, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much. All right, take care. Bye bye.